Welcome to part 3 of this Dave on Data tutorial series, a Python crash course. The subject of today's video is using Jupyter Notebooks. This is a technology that we're going to be using throughout the entire crash course to write and run and understand Python code. So let's go ahead and get started. What you can see here is my Macintosh desktop. This course will be recorded from now on using Mac, but essentially everything that you're going to see me doing on the Mac is 100% equally transferable to Windows. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a folder on my desktop. And I would recommend that you do something similar. You don't have to put a folder on your desktop, but some well-known location, maybe your documents or something like that would be great, because later on in the course, what you're going to be doing is creating Jupyter Notebooks and saving them to your computer. You might be downloading CSV files, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new folder here. And I'm going to call it Python Crash Course. And you can call it whatever you'd like, but I think that's a pretty good name. So this is where I'm going to store a Jupyter Notebook that I'm going to create in this video to demonstrate to you how to use Jupyter Notebooks. Okay, so what we're going to use for firing up Jupyter Notebooks is Anaconda Navigator. So you can see here I've opened up my applications folder in the Finder here on Mac, and I can see Anaconda Navigator. If you're on Windows, you can just search for it, as I showed in the Windows install video. So we just go ahead and double click that, and that's going to fire up the Anaconda Navigator application. And it's just a really quick and easy way to launch Jupyter Notebooks. You can, of course, do this from the terminal if you're comfortable with it, or the command line on Windows, but I'm going to assume that you're like me, and you just rather click some buttons. So what we can see here is Jupyter Notebook, listed in Anaconda Navigator, and I'm going to click Launch. Now, the first thing that you have to understand about Jupyter Notebook is that it is a web-based solution. So what we can see here is the Jupyter homepage, if you will. I'm going to go ahead and just maximize this. And let's check to see the zoom. 150, that's probably good. First and foremost, check this out. Jupyter Notebook is actually a mini web server. What this is saying right here is the Jupyter Notebook server is running on your local computer on port 8888. Now, if that's a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo that you don't care about, that's okay. Just know that it's a web server running locally. So what you have essentially is this mini little web server that hosts your Jupyter Notebooks, and that provides an interactive environment for you to write and run your code. Now, Jupyter Notebooks has become the de facto standard in Python for doing data and analytics. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It's extremely easy to use, and it's easy to share your results to others. Now, what we can see here is the base landing page for your Jupyter server, your Jupyter Notebook server. And what we can see here is a bunch of different file folders. I have Dropbox, so you can see that. I've got my documents, and I've got my desktop. So what you can do is use this interface to navigate to wherever you are storing your course files for this course. So I'm on my desktop here, so I'm going to go ahead and click Desktop. And it says, hey, Terminal would like to access the files on your desktop. That's totally okay. I click Allow, and you can see the Python Crash Course folder. So I'm just going to open that up. And what we see here is there's nothing in here. Normally what you would see is a list of files. So maybe you see some CSVs, maybe you see some notebook files, maybe you see some image files, whatever it might be. They'll all be listed here. But I don't have anything, so what I'm going to do is create a new Jupyter Notebook. So I would encourage you to follow along with me, by the way. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. Apologies. Feel free to pause and rewind the video if needed. So I'm going to assume that you're going to do that. You're going to follow along with me. So up here, we're going to say, look, I want to create a new Python 3 notebook. That's what I want. Okay, you can ignore this technical mumbo jumbo here. So it's a Python 3 notebook. That's what we want. So we click that. And what happens behind the scenes is we get a special kind of file that represents a Jupyter Notebook. And what we can see here is my Jupyter Notebook. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is change the name, because right now its name is untitled. So what I can do is just go up here, click on this, and I can rename this. I'm going to call it Test Notebook. Let's not get fancy. So Test Notebook. So I rename that, and now this shows up as Test Notebook. It also renames the file behind the scenes, by the way, on your file system on your hard drive. Now, this is the environment in which we write and run and share our Python code and our Python-based analyses. Now, the thing to remember at a high level is that Jupyter Notebook has a ton of functionality, but most of the time you don't use it. You can certainly learn a lot more about Jupyter Notebook on your own if you'd like. You can Google it. All kinds of tutorials exist on YouTube and other places as well. But for our purposes, Jupyter Notebook essentially consists of two things. Code cells. You can see this right here is a code cell, and Markdown cells. There's some other stuff as well. We're going to ignore that for the purposes of this crash course. So code cells, not surprisingly, is where we write Python code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something really, really simple. We're not going to worry too much about the actual Python code. Feel free to type along with me if you'd like. And what we're going to do is we're going to print something out in our notebook just to show you how code cells work at a really high level. So there is a function in Python called print, and it does exactly what you would think. It prints out whatever you tell it. So when we use functions or methods in Python, we have to put parentheses. That's part of the syntax. So this tells Python, I want to use the print function. And Python says, okay, Dave, great. What would you like to print? Not surprisingly, by default, you tend to use strings with the print function. So I will say, this is my first, let's call it a line of Python code. Yeah, why not? Exclamation point, because we're super excited. So this is legitimate Python code. I'm invoking the print function and I'm passing in a string. And a string, and we're going to talk more about this in the next video, in the next lesson when we talk about data types, but a string is something that's within quotes. You can see here I got single quotes and this is a string. So this is all legit Python code here. This will run. And if I want to see it run and see what happens, not surprisingly, I click the run button and see what happens. Notice that I run this code and Jupyter Notebook inserts another code cell right below it. It assumes that I'm going to want to write more Python code. But we're not going to worry about that right now. What we're going to do here is we're going to go back and say, all right, let's add more code. So you can add as many lines of code as you would like into a code cell. Generally speaking, you tend to not put a ton of code in them because it makes your notebooks harder to read and understand, but you can put a lot of code in a code cell if you'd like. So this is my second line of Python code. Exclamation point. Now I can click the run button again. That's totally legit. And you see here that I get both lines of code are ran, and I get 2 lines of output printed out. Exactly what you would expect. Another thing that you can do to execute your code is to hit Control Enter. So if you hit Control Enter, it will also execute your code. I'm going to hit Control Enter again, and I want you to notice something. Notice this right here. Notice how that counter is going up. That's just a counter that tells you how many times a particular code cell has been executed. So what we can tell is that this particular cell has been executed 4 times. Also, this will sometimes show a little star or an asterisk. If you see a star or an asterisk here, what it's telling you is that code cell is currently running. So you just need to wait. There's something going on that's taking a long time to run, and it's just processing. So that's another hint to understand what's going on with your code, how many times it's been executed, and whether or not it's currently running code. Okay, so we've got code cells. Now notice that I've got this thing highlighted in blue here, and if I click down here, I've got it in blue. This allows you to get into a mode where you can add new cells. So for example, you can go up to cell, and you can say, run the cells. You can go over here and you can say, insert the cells. And then when we're blue, we can insert cells above. Notice how I inserted one above, and then insert cells below, right here. Now, if I'm actually in a cell editing it, notice I'm green now. I can't add cells when I'm in green because I'm in edit mode. So just know that blue and green, blue I can add cells, green means that I'm editing a cell. So you're going to get a lot of practice with code cells, not surprisingly, in this course, because we're going to be spending a lot of time writing Python. But we also have this thing called a Markdown cell. And a Markdown cell is what really gives Jupyter Notebooks its power, because what it allows you to do is essentially insert formatted text or Markdown so that you can add background information, insert images, put links, all kinds of stuff into your actual notebooks in case you want to share them with others, for example. Or, more commonly, you put a lot of stuff in Markdown in your Jupyter Notebooks for you. So 6 months later, when you're looking at your Python code, you say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's what I was thinking when I did that. So we can go ahead and work with the Markdown cell. So we'll notice that I'm in this cell, it's green, I'm in edit mode. But what's happening here is that it's a code cell. So what I need to do is switch it to a Markdown cell. And notice that the little line number thing goes away because that differentiates a Markdown cell from a code cell. And the first type of Markdown that we're going to talk about is headings. It's something that you commonly do. When you structure your notebooks, you usually use headings to actually break up your notebook into logical chunks, kind of like chapters and sections in a textbook, for example. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use the biggest heading right now. And we're going to call this my first notebook. And if I run this, notice that it's blue. That's another visual cue that I'm doing Markdown and not code. When I run this, I get a nice big heading. Nicely formatted. Cool. Now, if I want to add one underneath, I can insert below, or I can just hit my B key. So if I hit B, boop, I get a new cell below. And notice by default, it's code. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to Markdown. And what I'm going to do here is create a subheading. My first lines of Python code. And if I hit Control Enter, notice how it's not much smaller, but it is a smaller font. And we can see all of my good lines of code here. Now moving down, let's go ahead and turn this guy into a Markdown cell. And let's say my first lines of Markdown. Notice what I'm doing here is I'm using these headings, Control Enter, or I can click the Run button, either way. So I'll click the Run button. And notice how I've got my first notebook. It's kind of like the title. And this is like the first chapter, and this is like the second chapter. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my B key to insert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's an arbitrary number. 10 cells. So now I've got some work area. So what I can do here is I can say, okay, under my first lines of Markdown, let's have a subsection. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a Markdown cell, and I'm going to use 3 hashtags here for yet a smaller heading. So I'm going to do bolding and italics. And if I Control Enter, run that, boom. Now let's go ahead and go in here and see how we can write some bold and italics text using Markdown. So what I can do here is just type in a line of text. And if I run this, Control Enter, doesn't look particularly fancy. Now if I click in this cell, or double click the cell, excuse me, I can get back in and I can edit it again. So what I'm going to do here is use double asterisk. Notice what it's doing is making everything after the double asterisk bolded. Now if I put 2 asterisks there, notice that only the thing contained within is bolded. Okay, and if I run this, only that word is bolded. Double click, back in edit mode, notice I'm green, and I can now do I want to make sure I spell it right, size text. So notice I'm only using single stars, singles asterisk, and if I run this, you can see that's how I can do bold and italics. Now let's go ahead and do another section here of Markdown. And by the way, there's a ton of Markdown features that Jupyter Notebooks support. In this crash course, we're going to just use the bare minimum, 80-20 rule. We're going to follow the 20% that we use it 80% of the time. So we're going to go ahead and create another 3 hashtag heading, bullets and horizontal, there we go, rules. Control Enter to run it. Notice how I've got my new heading here for a new section of Markdown. I'm going to switch this particular cell. I've clicked in it. It's green. I'm editing it. Switch it over to Markdown. And what I'm going to do is create a bulleted list. This is the first bullet. This is the second bullet. This is the third bullet. And using these asterisks right here at the beginning of this line tells Jupyter Notebook that I want to render this as a series of bullets. Okay, so we can add bulleted lists to our notebooks. Easy peasy, no problem. Now we can also add horizontal rules. So let's go ahead and switch this over to Markdown. And what we're going to do is use the underscore. Could get an edit mode here. 1, 2, 3. And notice how I got 1 underscore, it's black here. 2 underscores, it's black. When I do a third one, notice how it goes gray. That's an indication that Jupyter Notebook has now recognized 3 underscores in a row as being a markdown. And you can see here, it's pretty faint, but you can see there is a horizontal rule here, a gray horizontal rule. Now, next up, what we can do is add some hyperlinks. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this into Markdown. 1, 2, 3, hyperlinks. This is something you commonly do in your Jupyter Notebooks as you add hyperlinks. Okay, what I'm going to do here is scroll down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to say, all right, click on, let's see here, what should we do? Let's go to python.org. Click on, and I'm just going to leave this blank for a second for more info on Python. Now notice something here. This was not intended, by the way. I actually goofed up on this. Notice that the 4 is now green. And the reason for that is that this is not a markdown cell, it's a code cell. And 4, as we'll learn later on in the course, is actually Python code. So it's interpreting this as Python code because it's a code cell. So I need to switch this over to Markdown. Boop. So we can go ahead and keep going. So I'm going to say python.org, and I put that in square brackets. That's what that's going to do is give it a hyperlink. Notice how it's got a hyperlink going on here. It's got a little link under it. But what I haven't provided yet is where the hyperlink needs to go. So I can say, let's head it over to, let's point it at, python.org. And that's the syntax for declaring what I want actually displayed in the notebook once this is executed, once this markdown cell is ran. And this is the link the person will be taken to when they click on it. So if I hit Control Enter and run this, we can see click on this for python.org. And if I click on it, notice I get a nice tab opened up. And of course, it takes me to python.org. That's pretty cool. Now, the last thing that we're going to cover in this particular quick introduction to using Jupyter Notebooks is embedding Python code inside of the text of your notebook. Not actual code, the printed representation of your code. And that's a bit abstract, so it'll make more sense when you actually see it in action. So we're going to go ahead and mark down here. I'm going to add a triple hashtag embedded Python code. This is super useful for documentation, by the way, just so you know. So I want to run that, Control Enter. I'm going to switch this guy over to Markdown. And then I'm going to say how to embed Python code with syntax coloring. Ooh, fancy. So what we do is we use backticks. Now backticks are on your keyboard, like an English US style keyboard, up by the 1 key. Okay, this is not a single quote. This is a backtick. It's often under the tilde or the squiggly. So 1, 2, 3 backticks. And then I need to also tell Jupyter Notebook, hey, what kind of code am I embedding? So I say I'm embedding Python. And Jupyter Notebook says, okay, cool. So if I hit enter, I can go ahead and tab in and I can say, this is a comment. We'll talk more about comments later. And then print, this is embedded Python code. Now I need to close this off. I need to tell Jupyter Notebook where the end of the embedded Python code is by doing 3 more tick marks, just like that. And notice that I got a different kind of like color coding syntax here. This is kind of a visual indication of what's going on. Now, if I run this code, I can either hit Control Enter or hit the run button. This is what I get. Look at that. Nice. So you can see here, everything is formatted as if it were a code cell, but in fact, it's actually just textual documentation inside of my Jupyter Notebook. And if I scroll up, you can see how it looks very similar to the actual code here in terms of coloring. Okay, there you have it. This is a very quick introduction to Jupyter Notebooks. We'll be going through this more often throughout the course. By the end of the crash course, you'll have a lot of practice with it. So now that we've got this all done, what we can see here is that I have unsaved changes. So I don't want to lose what I've done. So I can hit this little icon here, this disk icon. Or of course I can go up here and I can do save as, all kinds of good stuff, but I'm just going to go ahead and click the icon here because I've renamed it. And I've now saved my Jupyter Notebook. When I'm ready to leave Jupyter Notebook, I just can't just close my browser window down because remember, I've got this web server thing going. So what I do is this. So I just go ahead and close this browser window here, or this tab. And notice that I've got a little green thing here. And what this is telling me is that this notebook is currently running. Or I can also go to running here, and it will show me all the Jupyter Notebooks that I have running, because you can run multiple Jupyter Notebooks at the same time if you would like. So what you can do is click the shutdown button here to shut down the notebook, because we're done, so we don't need it to run anymore. Or alternatively, you can also click here, check it, and then notice how I get a shutdown option. So I'll shut that down. Now that shuts down the Jupyter Notebook, but not the server. The Jupyter server is still running in the background. So what I need to do is click quit. And that tells me that the server has stopped. So I'm good there. And now I can just go ahead and quit Chrome altogether. Now what you can see here is a terminal window, which goes to show you that in fact Jupyter Notebook is a server running in the background. And you can see here that my process is completed. In Windows, by the way, you won't see this. You don't have to worry about it, but this is a Mac thing because Mac is Unix underneath. So we can just go ahead and quit the terminal here because we don't need it anymore. And then lastly, we can go ahead and quit Anaconda Navigator. And we're good to go. So that's it. Quick introduction to Jupyter Notebooks. Hope you're liking what you're seeing so far. If you do like this video, if you like the series, please go ahead and give this video a like. If you want to see future videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you know friends or colleagues that might want to learn Python and you think this might be good for them, feel free to recommend it to them. So let's talk about what's coming up next. The next video in this crash course is going to be all about Python data types. So this is where we're going to get into writing code basically for most, if not all, of the rest of the videos in this crash course. So stay tuned for that. When that video is ready, what you will see on your screen is a tile that you can click, and that will take you to that particular video in the series. So until next time, please stay healthy, and I wish you very happy data sleuthing.